Last week when I started, I talked about football. So this week when I start, I'm going to talk about basketball. That's my other passion. And if you don't know this, I love the Lakers. Unfortunately, they are out of the playoffs now, and they lost in the Western Conference Finals. So I'm not talking about the Lakers today. In fact, we're going to talk about another team today who's also done something pretty amazing. The Miami Heat. Now, what you may not understand about this particular team is that they have 7 players on their team who were undrafted. Think about that. If you know anything about sports, you draft your players every year, and then you kind of go from there. 7 of their players were not considered good enough to be drafted by the 30-plus teams in the NBA. But these coaches saw something inside of them, even though it was unlikely, to develop and train them up. They played semi-pro ball. They started working with coaching staff, and they started to develop as players. Now, the coaching staff deserves a lot of credit in this situation. And as they've been asked over the last few weeks, how did you get a team with 7 undrafted players to the Eastern Conference Finals? And they said, on a draft night, people look for the tangible things, how big you are, how strong you are, how tall you are, how fast you are, your percentages, those types of things. But what these coaches are saying is what those things don't show you is your work ethic. They don't show your grit. They don't show you your integrity or your character as a human being. So what we do is we go out and we look for these types of players, and then when they go undrafted, we swoop them up. And then we work with them because we know they have the other things, and now we're going to train the physical things. With this unlikely squad, they have now made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. One game left to determine if they get a go to the NBA Finals this year. Last week, we started a new series called Unlikely, and how God loves to use unlikely people to do extraordinary things in this world. You might feel underqualified to do something, but God qualifies those he calls. Last week, we talked about Gideon, somebody who literally was in a wine press threshing wheat. He was doing that out of fear because the enemy kept coming in and stealing all their crops, stealing all their herds. So what little he had, he was trying to protect, and he was in this wine press trying to make a meal for his family. And an angel of the Lord showed up and called something out inside of him. He said, "Mighty warrior." And he's like, "Who, me? Do you see where I am right now?" And goes on to tell him, "You are going to be the one that saves your nation." And again, he's like, "What? Me?" A lot of times in life, we feel unqualified. But if God calls your name, be sure to be obedient to what he is telling you to do. This week, we're going to focus on the unlikely methods that God has when he shows up. Have you ever had something unlikely happen in your life before? Maybe it was how you met your spouse. My wife and I, we have an unlikely story. Eventually, we'll tell you the full version. It requires both of us to give you both sides because we have a little bit different of a memory on this. But it was in college. It was at music camp at Vanguard University. We were at the beach. We were doing some team building exercises. We were on opposite teams. We were playing a game called Capture the Flag, but we did not use flags. We were using a squid. Yes, that is gross. A teammate was throwing it to Jessica, and I ran over to intercept the squid in the air. And as I did this, my body hit into Jessica's body. She will tell you that I tackled her to the ground. I threw the squid to my teammate, and then I extended my hand to help her up. And you know what she did? She punched me in the stomach. That's how we met. Unlikely. Maybe you found the job that you're in right now in an unlikely way. Maybe it was a career path that you never would have chose, but through life, somehow somebody saw something in you and it just kind of landed in your lap. And you're like, wow, I'm really good at this thing. Maybe how you ended up in Tehachapi was unlikely. We're going to be in Judges chapter 6, starting in verse 36. Let me give you a quick recap. The Jewish nation, they were living in a cycle of, God, we love you so much. We're going to follow you. We're going to obey you. And as they love God so much, he would put his hand of protection over them from their enemies. But then after a time of peace, they would kind of look around and be like, hey, we like what they've got. We want to be like them. And so they would start to worship the other false idols and things, and then God's hand of protection would come off of them, and then the enemies would come in and then could destroy them and beat them and make their lives awful and horrible. And then the nation of Israel would cry out again to God, and God, we need your help. Now, you would think they would learn after one time of doing this. There's entire books of the Bible dedicated to this season where God would have to raise up a leader, and they would call this person a judge to save the people. And then as they would turn back to the Lord, the protection and blessing of God would come on them. But then when they turned away from God again, then it all fell apart again, over and over and over again. Gideon was one of these judges. He was raised up. He was a nobody, but God saw something in him and called it out of him. The first thing that he asked him to do was to break down the idols that his father had established. And as he broke down these idols, he then built a new altar to the Lord. The people around Gideon were inspired by what he did, and when Gideon blew a trumpet, he called the people to arms, and people came, and they were ready because they believed God was with them. Judges chapter 6, verse 36. Gideon said to God, if you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there's dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. And this is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, and there was a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, do not be angry with me. Let me just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew. That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. Now, if you grew up in church, maybe you've heard this before where somebody says, I put a fleece out before the Lord. And if you're not familiar with that, that basically means this. You are seeking an answer from the Lord. You're seeking a confirmation from the Lord, maybe on something that's coming up in your life, or maybe he's given you some directions, but you're asking for a little bit more guidance in the decision process that you're making. So why was Gideon putting a fleece before the Lord? He wanted to make sure God was with him in this. You got to understand that Gideon, not very long before this, was hiding in fear. He was threshing wheat in a wine press. You thresh wheat on a high hill. He's in a low valley in a wine press because he was afraid. So God's calling something out of Gideon, who's been living in a life of fear. But Gideon's faith is now growing, but it still needs to mature and to develop. And you also have to understand something. God was asking Gideon to instigate a war. And Gideon's like, what, who, me? I'm not mighty. I'm not a warrior. I've been hiding in fear. My people have been living in fear. And you want us to start a war? And think about the thousands and thousands of lives that would be entrusted to Gideon. Those people's lives, their family lives, were all in his hands. And he was trying to, God, I need to know that you are in this, God. This is a big and bold move. And if you are not really behind this, God, I just want to make sure that I heard you correct. Did I hear you right, Lord? Or am I hearing something else? God, please confirm that you said this. When I was 22 years old, I started as a youth pastor in a church in Whittier called Life Church. And it was one of those situations where I took a big step of faith to even go there. They didn't really have any money to be able to pay me and whatnot, but I felt like God told me, I want you to go work and study under this person. And so I said, okay, God. I reached out to the church and I said, hey, I know I'm supposed to come. If you can give me just a roof, a bed to sleep in, I'm good. And if you can feed me, I'm good. I will come. God did one miracle where a person came in and gave the church around $20,000. It allowed the church to get out of debt. And the board said, hey, we take this as a sign from God. And so we're going to bring you on. We're not going to be able to pay you a lot, but you might be able to survive on it. Well, several months before this, I had gone on a missions trip to China and Korea. A man by the name of Hal Keener, who's from Visalia, 83 years old, he went on this trip with a bunch of college students. So he traveled the world with us. And as we were there, we shared stories, we talked and whatnot, and he kind of adopted Jessica and I like as grandkids almost. When I had started in ministry, I just felt like, hey, I need to reach out to this guy, and I just need to tell him, like, hey, I just want to let you know where I'm at in life. Like, I started as a youth pastor. And so I reached out to Vanguard, and I'm like, you know that guy who went on that trip with us? Like, I'd like to talk to him. Is there any way I can do that? And so I wrote him a letter. I sent the letter to Visalia. And then about a month later, I get a phone call from Hal Keener. And he's like, hey, I called Vanguard because I thought they would have your phone number, and they gave me your phone number. So I just want to let you know, I'm going to be down at Vanguard in a couple weeks, and I'd like to have lunch with you. Okay, Hal, yeah, that would be great. Now, here's what you need to understand. Hal was a person of means. When he picked me up, by the way, his favorite restaurant was Mimi's. Gotta love the muffins. He picked me up in a Bentley. His Bentley had carpet this thick in it. Your feet sunk into this thing. It was a triple turbo something. It was amazing. So we're sitting there at Mimi's, and he's like, Nick, you know, he's like, I'm a person that's had success in business and life, and he's like, I've been like trying to, you know, like I get asked a lot. People want me to give money to them all the time. And he's like, but I just don't want to give it out. He's like, I want to make sure it's going to the right person, the right cause. And so he said, what I did is I started praying before the Lord, and he's like, I put a fleece out and said, God, I need you to show me the person that you want me to bless. And he's like, that morning, I got your letter in the mail. And he's like, Nick, I know it was you. God said, I'm supposed to help you. For the next year, Hal Keener sent me a check every single month for $200. Now, that may not sound a lot to you, but when you're barely surviving, $200 is a lot of money. And it allowed me to be able to survive as a youth pastor. Sometimes we ask for confirmation from the Lord, especially on big decisions in life. I told you last week, I asked for confirmation from the Lord about us coming to Tehachapi. My God, I don't know if we're really supposed to be here. Like, we're big city, the same big city. Like, God, is this really what you have? And he sent us a sign. And if you were here last week, you heard me, and I refer to it from here on out, the exploding tree. All right? If you don't know what that means, go onto YouTube. You watch last week's sermon, you'll hear about it, all right? Back to the story here. Judges chapter 7. Verse 1, early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley north of the hill of Morah. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men. I cannot deliver Midian into their hands, or Israel would boast against me. My own strength has saved me. God didn't want these soldiers to think that they won the battle. He didn't want them to think like, hey, you guys are like, you know, you're Army Rangers, you're the SEALs, you're Delta Force, you're Special Forces, that you came in, that you got all this extra, you know, training, and that you're just so much better than everybody, and then like you got it, and I don't want you to get a big head and think that you did this. Verse 3, now announce to the army, Anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained. All right, do the math with me real quick. That means he had 32,000 in his army. 68% of his army just left. Their enemy had 132,000 people in his army. That's not good odds. That was 4-1 odds. God does a test here. It's a test for these soldiers. It's a test of courage. God said, we need to make this smaller. Now, that seems counterintuitive. Wait a second. We're already smaller than them. They're already big. They got experience. They're the ones who've been beating us up for years and years and years. And you want us to have less guys in our military to go against them? That doesn't make sense. It's unlikely. But they gave him permission. Hey, if you're afraid, go ahead and go home. Now, you may wonder, why? There actually was a biblical precedent for this in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 5. The officers shall say to the army, has anyone built a new house and not yet begun to live in it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle and someone else may begin to live in it. Has anyone planted a vineyard and not begun to enjoy it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle and someone else enjoy it. Has anyone become pledged to a woman and not married her? Let him go home, or he may die in battle and someone else marry her. Then the officers shall add, is anyone afraid or faint-hearted? Let him go home, so that his fellow soldiers will not become disheartened too. Fear is contagious. It's like a disease. Fear is contagious. Now, I told you the math already. 68%. 68% of these men were afraid and did not want to be there. I have never been in the military, but I'm going to tell you, I do not want to go with 68% of the people around me that are questionable. You probably would not want to go. That means the person on your left and the person on your right don't want to be there and they're afraid. This was a test of courage. And so, 22,000 people left. Now remember, they had been living in a constant state of fear for a long time. So it's all they knew. But out of the 32,000 they started with, 10,000 remained. 10,000 seemed to have faith. Faith is also contagious. In life, we often we want to pull people in and be like, hey, be a part of me, be a part of what we're doing here. We want to grow our numbers in a certain way, and we want more people to go to battle with us. But sometimes it's not about having more people. Sometimes it's just about having the right people. Who are you surrounding yourself with in your life? Are they people you want to go to battle with? They want to go to spiritual battle with? Life is hard, and we need people around us who are the right people, who we can lean on, who we can believe in and encourage one another and hope with one another. Faith is contagious. 22,000 left, 10,000 remain, but the 10,000 that remained were not afraid. The odds now, 13 Midianites for every one Israelite. Judges 7, verse 4. But the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will thin them out for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go. Wait a second, this seems unlikely. God already took out 68% of the people. And he's saying, you still have too many. Lord, we're going to win with less than 10,000 people? They got 132,000 people, God. I don't think this makes much sense. Sometimes in life, the numbers that are around you, the stats that are around you, the signs that are around you don't always make sense. And we can get so caught up in something that we get discouraged and we don't do what God has asked us to do. But what we have to understand is that sometimes God, behind the scenes, is rearranging things on purpose. On the exterior, it doesn't look likely. Lord, this will never happen. But behind the scenes, God is orchestrating things and putting things in place. What you may see is a setback in your life. What you may see is a setback in your finances or in your workplace or in your school or whatever it may. What you may see as a setback could be a setup. You see, God was stripping this army down from 32,000 to 10,000. You know, one of the things that we go like, God, you know, my finances, like, Lord, it seems to be like I'm making less money. I got a demotion or whatever. Like, God, how are we supposed to make it? And God's just saying to you, like, hey, I know the numbers don't look good to you, but I'm also wanting you to trust me with your finances. And I'm going to tell you this, God's math is not human math. I stand here today as an example of this over and over and over again. Where it's like, God, I got this. And he's like, no, what you really have is this. You've been faithful. You've trusted me with this. And so here you go. He's multiplied things that I had. And I'm like, God, at the end of the month, it's saying, look right. But it's okay. Thank you, God. I don't know how we got there, but thank you, God. Verse 5, so Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, separate those who lap the water with their tongues as a dog laps from those who kneel down to drink. 300 of them drank from cupped hands, lapping like dogs. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, with the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the others go home. So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites home, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and the trumpets of others. The first test for the soldiers was a test of courage. The second test was a test of urgency. A test of urgency. Now, this is an unusual test. Any of you that have been in the military, you probably did some sort of physical test. Physical fitness assessment to see, hey, can your body withstand this? Are you capable of carrying, 70-pound packs and marching, 10 miles? Are your joints okay? Is your back okay? Is your eyesight okay? And they put you through these tests. They're probably also going to check out some, mental acuity. Are you okay in these areas? Because this is life or death situations. Nowhere in the military do they decide if you are going to be in the military by how you drink water. This is an unlikely test. So God said, we're going to go over here. We're going to go to this water, and you're just going to watch, and whatever ones that I say, they get to stay. They get to stay. The other ones got to go. And so it says that 300 people, they cupped up the water in their hands, and I'm not making this part up. It says they lapped it like a dog. You ever seen a dog drink water? And God says, there's your people. That's your army. That seems silly to us, right? God, you want me to do what with what? That means 9,700. It says that they got down on their knees and they put their face in the water. So they did this. Now, this may not make sense to you. Let me tell you why. In law enforcement, there's something that is referred to as Cooper's colors. It's a system for situational awareness. There's 4 colors: white, yellow, orange, and red. If you were in the white color, what this means is that you're in a relaxed state, that you are unaware of the things that are around you. And really, this should only be happening when you're asleep. The yellow color is when you're relaxed, but you're aware of what's around you. You're hearing, you're listening, you're looking at the signs around you. I used to have a detective that I would go to lunch with every once in a while, and he'd be like, I need to sit on this side of the table. I'm like, how come? So I can see the door. I'm like, oh. He wanted to be situationally aware of what was happening. In the orange, you might see something that's of interest. It may or may not be a threat, but you're just following somebody. You're watching them. Something seems a little bit peculiar about the situation. Then you get in the red situation, and then this is somebody that was a potential threat. Now they're a potential target, and you are ready. You probably have your hand on your weapon, and you're ready to move. In this situation with the men who are drinking at the water, the people who are on their knees with their face in the water, they're living in the white. They are unaware. They're making themselves be in a vulnerable situation. The people who cupped it up, and even though they looked weird drinking like a dog, they were living in the yellow. They were situationally aware. They could hear, they could see things around them, so if the enemy was coming, they were prepared. Friends, sometimes in life, we're living in the white when we need to be living in the yellow. We put our head down on the water. We don't see what's happening around us. We don't see what's happening with our kids. We don't see what's happening in our marriage. We need to live in the yellow. We need to be aware of what is happening around us. These men who were living in the yellow, they were ready to spring to action. You see, there was 10,000 who were not afraid, but there was only 300 who were ready for action. Now the ratio is 440 Midianites to 1 Israelite. That's not good. And that's who he's going to go to battle with. Now, how many of you know if this is you or I, you probably need another confirmation from God? I think God was sensing what was happening, and Gideon's like, God, I'm left with some dudes drinking like a dog, and we're about to go face these people, got 132,000 strong, and we got 300. Verses 8 through 14, I'm just going to paraphrase this. We don't have time to read it all, but Gideon needs confirmation. So God tells him, hey, I want you to go into the Midianite camp, sneak in at nighttime, and as you're there, you're going to hear something that you need to hear. He sneaks into camp with another person, and they're hearing this soldier there who had just had a dream about Gideon coming in, invading, and he says, we're surely going to die. Gideon's like, all right. He goes back to his people, and he says, this is what the Lord has said. He gives them the next confirmation. We pick up the story here in verse 15. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshiped. Here's something that you and I need to do in life. When you get a confirmation from God that the victory is already yours, the battle may not be fought, but the victory is already yours, you need to pause and you need to take a moment and you need to worship and thank him. There are moments in life that God's already promised you that the battle is going to be won. And you need to thank him, you need to honor him, you need to praise him for those things. But then there's still a battle that's going to be fought. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands. Dividing 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars in the hands of all of them with torches inside. So now we got 3 groups of 100. They're surrounding the exterior of this camp. They've got Uzis in one hand. They got missile launchers in the other hand. No. They got a trumpet in one hand, and they got an empty jar with the torch. Again, unlikely methods. Verse 17. Watch me, he told them. Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men with him reached the edge of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just after they had changed the guard. They blew their trumpets and broke the jars that were in their hands. The three companies blew trumpets and smashed the jars, grasping the torches in their left hand and holding in their right hands the trumpets. They were to blow. They shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." So it's the middle of the night. They're waiting for their leader, for Gideon, to give the sign. And then all of a sudden they hear a trumpet start going off. And then all the other trumpets start going off. They have these jars. They start smashing the jars on the ground, and torches are lit and come up into the air. I need you to understand, it doesn't say that they had a weapon. It said they had a trumpet and they had a torch. Now I'm sure they probably had a sword strapped to their body somewhere. But something amazing was about to happen. As these torches are lit, the trumpets are blowing, the Midianites, they wake up and they are disillusioned, like, what's happening? And they're all in chaos and, what are we supposed to do? Verse 21. While each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. Did you just hear that? These dudes are blowing the trumpet, got torches, they're screaming, ah! The other guys, they're asleep, they wake up, and they're in such a disillusionment that they start running around with their swords, just killing each other. This is insane. This is so unlikely. The methods of God can be so unlikely in our life. Understand that God fought this battle with them and for them. They just needed to be obedient. God fought the battle for them. They just had to be obedient. Gideon's men didn't have to fight with swords at this moment. They fought with the Spirit of God upon them. Friends, there are moments in life you need to lay down the sword and you need to fight with the Spirit of God. That's your power. We were singing that song, I Speak Jesus. That's the authority. That's the power. It's not how smart you are. It's not your finances. It's not how many cool, physical abilities or skill sets that you have. Use the Spirit of God as He empowers you to fight the battle. You might be in a situation right now where you're trying to fight it on your own, whatever the battle may be, and God's just saying, I need you to lay down what you're trying to fight with, and I need you just to pray. Like, but God, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Right. Because I'm going to win this battle. You're not going to win this battle. You can't do it on your own. Let me win it, but I need you to show me that you trust me. Now, there are enough negative people in this world. There are enough people who comment negative comments about everything, complain about everything. I tell people all the time, if we would spend as much time complaining as we did in prayer, we'd probably start to see some things changing in this world. It's really easy to complain. It's really easy to be negative. You know what's not so easy? To wake up and get on your knees before the Lord and say, God, I don't know how. The enemy looks great. The numbers don't make sense. But God, I need your help. I trust you, Lord. Please fight this battle for me because I can't do it on my own, God. Victory comes through obedience. Victory comes through prayer and fasting. Victory comes when we put our faith over our fear. Judges 8, verse 28. Thus, Midian was subdued before the Israelites and did not raise its head again. During Gideon's lifetime, the land had peace for 40 years. In life, you're going to have difficult situations. You're going to have moments that are challenging, that don't make sense. God, what am I supposed to do in those moments? Turn to Him. Trust Him. Surround yourself with people who believe. Surround yourself with people who are going to encourage you. Surround yourself with people who are going to fight for you and with you. Go to your knees in prayer. Cry out to the Lord. Trust Him. Be obedient to whatever He's asked you to do. It may not make sense. But God is so powerful. Just trust him.